Today on The Big Story, the Chinese government will cut import tariffs for goods including pork and tech items starting next year. How does this affect Singapore? Private sector companies are still planning to give out bonuses of 1 to 2 months despite slower economic growth. A taste test of a different kind, a $2 McChicken in Toa Payoh, costs almost double at Lucky Plaza. Find out how consumers can make better purchasing decisions. It's a brand new week and you're watching The Big Story, where we'll discuss the hottest topics of the day right in the heart of the newsroom. Now, I'm Haryanto coming to you live right here. Now, of course, on to our first segment. China will lower import tariffs on products including frozen pork, pharmaceuticals and some types of semiconductors starting from January 1st, 2020. While the move isn't directly related to the US-China trade war, it supports Beijing's claim to further open its economy. China will implement temporary import tariffs, which are lower than most favoured nation tariffs on more than 850 products. The tariff changes were made to increase imports of products facing a relative domestic shortage of foreign specialty goods for everyday consumption, China's finance ministry said in a statement. Goods from countries including Singapore, New Zealand, Australia and South Korea will have even lower levies under the renegotiated free trade agreements with China. We have China correspondent Denson Chong live on Skype right now to tell us more about the impact of these lower tariffs. Hi, Denson.
Hi, Haryanto.
Now, Denson, if we could start, with the ongoing trade war that's happening right now, China is hoping to diversify its market. Could this lowering of tariffs help with that, and if so, how?
Well, today we heard that China is lowering tariffs on everything, like you mentioned, from medicines, avocados, pork, some tech products, petroleum products from January 1st. The finance ministry, which made this announcement this morning, says this is a move to sort of boost imports and also address domestic shortages of certain goods. What it will effectively do is it will lower the cost that Chinese importers would have to pay for these products. It makes them more competitive vis-a-vis their Chinese alternatives. So it will have several effects. One, it will boost imports with other countries. If you're talking about the trade war, it will reduce China's reliance on some kinds of American goods. The move, like you mentioned, is also meant to increase imports in certain products facing a domestic shortage. As the finance ministry put it. One of the key things, that has caught everybody's attention today is that is pork, of course. China's hog herds, have been decimated by an African swine flu epidemic this year. With the New Year and the Chinese New Year coming up, it's very important that China tries to plug that gap, with some foreign pork. Another thing is that this, will introduce more competition into China's domestic market. Chinese companies will have to compete with cheaper foreign products, and it will force them to make better quality products for the Chinese market. This is something I think that several analysts have said is one of the more positive effects to come out of the trade war.
Right. Now, Denson, of course, we know the benefits that China stand to gain from this lowering of tariffs. Now, let's take it back here. How is this lowering of tariffs going to affect Singapore?
Singapore has a free trade agreement with China, and already this eliminates tariffs for over 95% of Singapore's exports to China. This latest move by Beijing will reduce tariffs even further from these negotiated bilateral trade agreement rates. It doesn't apply just to Singapore. It also affects New Zealand, Australia, South Korea, several other countries. I had a look at some of the goods that are affected by lower tariffs. It runs to something like over 200 pages. But it sort of includes stuff like meat products, some kinds of petroleum products, semiconductors, electronic components, and so on. Basically, it will give Singapore exports, a greater edge in China.
Right. Now, Denson, this move, of course, to lower the import tariffs also reaffirms China's commitment to open up its economy. Could you explain more on that?
One of the core complaints that the US has made in this trade war is that China's market is not open. It has barriers, to trade and investment. In general, doing business in China is not easy as a foreign company, as opposed to Chinese companies that operate overseas. But Chinese analysts are pointing to this morning's announcement, and they're saying that this is a genuine move on China's part that shows that one, it's committed to work towards lower tariffs, and two, to free and more liberal trade. And this latest announcement is a concrete indication of its intention. They also point to other steps that China is taking. For example, also in January, a new foreign investment law will come into effect, which will do things like boost intellectual property protection, make it easier for foreign companies to operate in China. This year also has lifted restrictions on foreign investment into the financial sector. One Chinese academic told me this afternoon that with both sides, hopefully about to sign a phase 1 trade agreement, this morning's announcement is a sign to the US that China is serious about his promises.
Right. Now, thank you so much, Denson, for coming on to just share with us on how this lowering of tariffs can affect both China itself and, of course, here in Singapore. Now, to read more on this, you can head on to our website at straitstimes.com. Moving on to our second segment, this year most of Singapore's 85,000 civil servants will get a bonus that is the lowest in 10 years. Now the civil service total bonus for this year is 1.55 months. Private sector companies are still planning to give out bonuses of around 1 to 2 months despite slower economic growth. The 1 to 2 month bonus is largely in line with or lower than in previous years, although sectors including finance, insurance and healthcare may see higher bonuses than average. Given the concerns that some employers would cut bonuses following the civil service, the Singapore National Employers Federation, or SNEF, urged private sector companies to be guided by the National Wages Council recommendations when deciding on bonuses. These recommendations include variable payments for employees if companies do well. SNEF also urged bosses to take company performance into account when they decide on bonuses. To share more on this, we have Assistant Business Editor Joanna Siao. Welcome, Jo.
Thanks, Haryanto.
Jo, so we know, right, private sector companies, they tend to take civil service payouts into account when determining their own bonuses, but they can still choose not to do it. What could influence them to do otherwise?
Okay, well, the hope is that companies which have done well in the past year will reward their workers accordingly. So even though overall economic growth has slowed, there are still industries and companies which have done better. Industry growth and business performance usually affect bonus payouts, and company size does too. So smaller companies may have tighter cash flows and may be unable to give out generous bonuses, but they may choose to offer other perks such as stock options, flexible work arrangements, or better pay.
Right.
And Singapore Human Resources Institute President Loh Pek Kim, who is also the government's chief HR officer, said that when determining bonuses, companies should consider things like productivity levels of workers, what competitors are offering, individual performance of staff, and also like how to strike a balance between doing what is fair to employees and sustainable for the business.
Right. So, Jo, we know that is 1 to 2 months of bonus payout, it seems. What do the figures then mean for employees?
Well, it suggests that the outlook isn't too terrible at the moment because companies are still giving bonuses, and pay is actually generally expected to continue to go up next year, though perhaps not as quickly as in previous years. I guess workers are benefiting from the tight labour market because companies still have to offer attractive, competitive salaries in order to attract talent, especially in certain industries where there's a skills shortage, like in IT and healthcare. And companies may also choose to give bigger payouts to maybe lower skill workers for whom bonuses may form a quite important proportion of their take-home pay. And one boss explained that in terms of the financial impact to the company, like half a month more of bonus for someone who's earning $3,000 costs a lot less to the company than half a month more for someone who's like earning $15,000.
Of course, of course. Well, all in all, Jo, hopefully this is great news, especially in this holiday season, right? Thank you so much again for taking time off to be with us right here. Now, to read more on this, you can visit our website at straitstimes.com. And now let's move on to What's Trending, where Dylan will share with us what's buzzing in the internetverse. Over to you, Dylan.
Thanks, Haryanto. It's time for What's Trending. First up, yikes! The personal data of 2,400 Ministry of Defence and Singapore Armed Forces personnel may have been leaked. The data leak occurred at ST Logistics, a privately owned vendor of SAF and MINDEF, through email phishing by malicious malware. The data included the full names and NRIC numbers, among other information. MINDEF says that affected personnel will be notified from Saturday. Moving on, dreaming about the next time you can have a bowl of Oishi ramen, you might want to think again, as a Japanese study says that there might be a link between ramen and the risk of stroke. Why? Because soupy ramen is high in carbohydrates and salt. Researchers found a significant correlation between the number of ramen restaurants per capita and the stroke mortality rate across gender and age range. Everything in moderation, I guess. And finally, speaking of food, we are 2 days away from Christmas. Before you get a feasting, here are some tips as to how you can eat healthy. Tip number 1, eat smart. Avoid overeating by not arriving to parties hungry. Pace yourself and stop once you are full. Tip number 2, what if you have diabetes? Well, you can limit your consumption of carbohydrates, fill up with vegetables, and cut down on desserts and processed meat. Tip number 3, have high cholesterol, go for leaner cuts of meat, and avoid gravy and other sauces. Tip number 4, have high blood pressure, avoid food with saturated fats, sodium, and cholesterol. Have a wonderful Christmas break, everyone. And that's all we have for What's Trending today. If you've seen a story you want to share, link it in the comments section below. Back to you, Haryanto.
Thanks, Dylan. I think you say it right. It cannot be stressed enough. Everything in moderation. Now, moving on to our third segment, price differences for the same items depending on where they are being sold might not be something new. But what is the extent of these differences? Now, the answer may surprise you, as this senior correspondent To Yong Chuan, with the help of his 13-year-old daughter, find out that a McChicken costs $2 in Toa Payoh, but is almost double in price at Lucky Plaza. While companies generally publish their prices, there is an invisible veil over prices in that consumers are not told exactly what they are paying for. Companies can also charge different prices for the same items without telling customers about it. If consumers know how companies price their products and services, they would be able to make better decisions and save money on their purchases. Now, to discuss more on this, we have Yong Chuan himself in the studio. Welcome, Yong Chuan.
Thank you.
Now, Yong Chuan, as a start, if you could briefly explain how this idea of checking out the different prices come about. What were you hoping to get out of this casual study?
So this was for a column on personal finance in the Sunday Times. So I thought to prepare for it, one of the things I could get my daughter, secondary one, she's having school holidays, was to help me do some legwork. So the brief given to her was visit at least 5 McDonald's outlets, something that she's familiar with, and check out the price differences of some of the key items. Now, this is not a story about McDonald's. Now, all of us know for the longest time that it is normal for companies to price the same product differently at various locations. So the only explanation I can think of is because of rent. Right? Rent is what the companies, is the cost that the company absorbs to deliver the product or the service to you at that place.
Right.
Now, so my daughter, being very enterprising, visited 7 instead of 5, and she found that there were some price differences. Now, some price differences were really small. So for some of the meals that cost about $10, the difference can be as small as 40 cents.
Okay.
But the thing that struck her was McChicken. $2 in Toa Payoh, in Junction 8, but $3.95.
Almost double.
Almost double at Lidu and at Lucky Plaza.
Right.
So that was something that struck her, and it became a bit of a talking point. But it is not about McDonald's, it is about price differentiation. I mean, for example, if you go to neighborhood shops, things may be priced differently, or even at the same hawker center, the same dish might be priced differently.
Right.
So the point of that story, of that personal column, was to advise consumers before you purchase something, just take a bit more time to compare prices.
Right. Now, Yong Chuan, you mentioned regarding rental, right? Now, rental overheads is clearly also considered in these price differences, and this is what you mentioned as well. Toa Payoh versus, say, pricey Lucky Plaza. What are some other factors, that could push up the price point as well?
Speaking generally, not just in the case of fast food, I can think of 2. The first reason could be, of course, labor costs. Joints that run 24 hours, that to deliver a product or a service, will definitely need to hire people. And I've been a manpower correspondent for many years. I can tell you, if you need to hire someone to work in the evening or overnight, you have to pay the person more.
Yep.
So labor cost is another factor. A second factor I can think of is something that's a bit of a new phenomenon. We call it surge pricing.
Right.
So when demand
Yes.
goes up, right, you're familiar with Grab, with
The
Gojek,
private hire cars,
private hire
right?
cars, yeah. Thankfully, for most delivery of products, as we see, fast food and insurance products, the examples I've cited in the column, surge pricing doesn't apply. So the main reason I can think of are mainly rent.
Right, right. And Yong Chuan, so in your story, you briefly explained as well in terms of knowing how price breakdowns can help consumers better understand what they are paying for, right? Can you explain a bit more, how does this work, knowing the price points and, companies being transparent about the breakdown of their prices?
Okay, I think the first thing consumers can do is to be flexible. So for example, after this column, I know that if I were to go to Shaw Lido to watch a movie, if I have a craving for McChicken, I'll say, well, maybe let's wait.
Okay.
Right? Let's satisfy the craving another day.
Yeah.
So be flexible, be aware of alternative options, and maybe nowadays with internet and social media, with some crowdsourcing of information, we may just Google to see, are there cheaper prices elsewhere? So these are some simple things that we can do.
Yeah.
And it comes back to the theme of the column.
Right.
Small change, you can save a little bit here, a little bit there. You can save more in the long run.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yong Chuan, for coming on to share more on this. Now, to read more on Yong Chuan's piece, of course, you can check it out on our website. Now, those are the top stories for today. For more news and videos, of course, you can visit straitstimes.com. On that note, we will also be broadcasting live the solar eclipse at Marina Barrage this Thursday. You can get the details on our Facebook page. Now, once again, I'm Haryanto Diman. The big story will be back on Thursday, December 26. Till then, from all of us right here at Straits Times, we would like to wish you Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.